Good afternoon. Welcome to the regular Friday meeting of the City Club of Portland. I'm Gretchen Lashley, First Vice President of the City Club, filling in for the President, Jim Westwood. We have some new members in the audience, and I'd appreciate it if you'd applaud for them after we read the list. Sean Madian, master's student from Atkinson Graduate School of Management. Jim McEver, please rise if you're in the audience. Jim McEver, owner, FM Associates. Alden Peterson, dentist, Permanente Dental Associates. Mary Royer, president, National Parents League Incorporated. And Robert Skipper, sheriff of Multnomah County. Please join with me in welcoming them to our club. We have a few announcements this afternoon. Next Friday, the 8th, Robert Theobald, noted futurist and author, speaking on Turning the Century, Opportunities for Leaders. Theobald will provide his perspective on the future as he advocates for the acceptance of personal and economic freedom and the need for new goals and new styles of decision-making. Theobald, the author of over 20 books, is a socio-economist who has been called controversial, original, and perhaps a little dangerous. Please note next week's program will be held in the U.S. Bancorp Tower, 41st floor. And Wednesday, November 20th, a science breakfast sponsored by the Science and High Technology Standing Committee, presenting Glenn Kays, certified prosthetist, Oregon Health Sciences University. Kays will talk about high-tech advancements in artificial limbs. The Portland Hilton, parlors A, B, and C, ballroom level. Please call Cindy Lehman at the City Club office to make your reservations, and reservations are required for that science breakfast. Now, you will note in this week's bulletin some bad news that beginning on Friday, December 1st, luncheon prices for City Club programs will increase to $11 for members and $15 for guests. The increase is prompted by rising costs at the Benson and the Hilton. This is the first increase in club luncheon prices in 3 years, you will note. Now, today's program is co-sponsored by the Black United Fund of Oregon. We have several representatives from that organization with us today. Welcome, and thank you for helping to make this program possible. Our board host today, seated at the head table, is Lloyd Anderson, member of the Board of Governors. He will ask the first question of our speaker. And the second question today will be asked by Joanne Allen, Development Director of the Black United Fund, who is also on the City Club Education Standing Committee. We will open the meeting up to questions from City Club members in the audience after our speakers' prepared remarks, and written questions will also be asked as time permits. Forms are on your table for written questions. Please hold them up after the speech so that staff can gather them. Now, here today to introduce our speaker is Evel Gordley, State Representative for District 19 and former Associate Director of American Friends Service Committee and a board member of the Black United Fund of Oregon. Representative Gordley.
Thank you and good afternoon. I would like to first acknowledge Mr. Jim Westwood and the City Club of Portland, who along with the Black United Fund of Oregon is co-sponsoring this program. I would also like to thank our special guest who makes our work possible. As you may already know, the Black United Fund of Oregon is a fundraising, philanthropic, and community development organization which raises money through workplace campaigns and allocates charitable dollars to more than 200 community-based organizations, as well as operates programs that address unmet needs in low-income communities. As part of our education program, the Black United Fund of Oregon has convened a 3-day educational conference to address the issues that disproportionately affect the educational process for low-income children. Dr. Edelin is here as a part of that conference, along with other scholars and practitioners from across the country, who have demonstrated success in educating low-income children. Dr. Edelin is President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Urban Coalition. Dr. Edelin has been associated with the coalition since 1977 after an outstanding career as a social activist, scholar, academic administrator at some of the nation's leading institutions. Before her tenure with the National Urban Coalition, Dr. Edelin was founder and chair of the Department of African American Studies at Northeastern University in Boston. She taught at Brandeis University, Emerson College, and the European Division of the University of Maryland. Dr. Edelin serves on the board of directors of the National Center for Policy Alternatives and is a member of the DC Committee on Public Education, U.S. Department of Education Educational Partnership Study Group, the National Public Radio's Advisory Committee on Special Projects, and the Black Leadership Forum. Dr. Edelin is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Fisk University. She performed undergraduate work at Harvard University, earned a master's degree in philosophy from the University of East Anglia in Norwich, England, and a doctorate in philosophy from Boston University. Please join me in a warm Rose City welcome for Dr. Edelin.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone is enjoying the meal. I don't normally eat before a talk like this, but between the nip in the air and the lovely buffet, I ended up eating quite a bit. I hope you enjoy your lunch as well. This is my first trip to Portland, and though I have many colleagues here with whom I've been in touch over the years in other parts of the country, I'm enjoying myself immensely. Someone said this is not the most scenic day. So I said, well, that's good because I've been indoors all day anyway. Maybe by tomorrow, when I may have a little flexibility in my schedule, the sun will come out and I'll get to enjoy what appears to be a lovely, lovely city. More importantly, though, I've had the warmest welcome. The meetings this morning have gone very well. I hope that some of you, if you have not, will find time to go by, particularly if you have an interest in education. It's substantive, and the people in the audience who have come, teachers, educators, parents, as well as corporate leadership, are vitally interested in these issues. It's a serious session of the kind that one takes heart in these very serious times. I am particularly pleased to have been invited by the City Club of Portland and to have an opportunity later to meet with the young people who you involve in your efforts. That is of vital concern to me. Where is the next generation of leadership, and why don't more of us incorporate them into all of our activities the way you're doing here? That's very important. This morning at the conference, the Black United Fund of Oregon asked me to address Workforce 2000 issues. Their overall theme, as you may know, is improving academic performance, variables for success, schools, families, and community working together. This afternoon, I'd like to do something just a little different. I've been asked by you to focus in on issues that disproportionately affect the educational process for low-income children. In that regard, I think it's helpful to sort of organize that kind of discussion around President Bush and the governor's education goals for the year 2000. I hope most of you are familiar with them, but I will be mentioning them specifically as we go. And let me just say before beginning that I assume that we are here because we're serious, and that we are not just here simply to be polite and welcome one another, but that we do indeed want to talk candidly and seriously about the issues that we're confronting right now. And it's in that spirit that I offer some thoughts. The 1980s, as you probably know, if you're interested in education at all, have launched the most sustained and far-reaching set of efforts to, quote unquote, reform American education at the elementary and secondary levels, not at the higher levels as of now. Since the formation of the common school at the turn of the 20th century. These efforts are national in scope. They are top-down. They involve the president and the governors and others. In fact, virtually nobody else was at that summit, as you recall, in Virginia. And yet they must be spearheaded by states and local governments. We have approximately, I believe at last count, 60,000 school boards and entities that have to autonomously make judgments as to how we will implement these goals. Corporations, teacher unions, governors, and educators up and down the spectrum have got to form alliances. There's got to be some sense in terms of the strategic nature of reaching these goals. There's got to be some sense of a shared vision, of a shared mission in their accomplishment. And all of these sectors, which by the way are the historic urban coalition sectors as well, have to be involved based on the realization that education's importance to individuals and to society is increasing dramatically as we move from a manufacturing economy to a technology-based information economy in a global marketplace in this, the last decade of the millennium. I don't like to just quote a lot of statistics. I mean, my eyes glaze over just like everybody else's when you hear a whole lot of them, but there's some are very key, and I'd like to just throw in a few here and there that we need for this discussion. One very telling one. We have known since 1979, when the first demographic projections were given to us relative to this decade, that at least 40%, and now it looks like perhaps as many as half, of all college-age young people in the United States will be African American or Hispanic by the year 1995. Half. Right now, as you know, none of our young people, not one single group of young people in the United States at this point in time is as well prepared, particularly in the technical fields, mathematics, science, and the technical fields, as their cohorts in Japan, Germany, and some of the other countries in Europe. None of them. But these young people of color, I hope you will agree, are grievously underprepared, particularly in those areas at this point in time. We will be exporting more jobs, and we will be importing more workers, particularly those with technical skills. But I do not think, and I hope you agree, that we can export half of our labor force. So that for the first time really in American history, the fate of children of color and the fate of the United States as a leading world competitive power are one and the same. This is the first time that that has been true, and it has implications, which I assume is one of the reasons that you've asked me to address this topic this morning. Whereas in 1900, about half of the nation's jobs, 50%, required low or unskilled labor. Now, fewer than 10% do. And while fewer than 10% of jobs at the beginning of this century were professional or technical jobs requiring higher education, now more than half of the new jobs created between now and the year 2000 will require education beyond high school, and almost 1/3 will require a college degree. These changes in society mean that the traditional outcomes of our school system, and I put a pin here because many of us are rather nostalgic about what school used to be. We think that school used to educate everybody. Public schooling in America has never educated everybody. Academic success for some and failure for many more has always been the hallmark of American education. What makes it problematic now is there are no schools in factories or on farms where those who do not excel in the college track can go. That percentage, that ratio has turned right on its head. It used to be 10% here, 50% there. Now it's the reverse. So while American schools have had high dropout rates and minimal success with many graduates in past decades, there were decent jobs. You could raise your family. Your children could do better than you had done on the farm or in the factory to accommodate those for whom schooling was not a successful experience. Now, the life chances of children whom schools have failed grows very dim indeed. A male high school dropout in 1986 had one chance in 3 of being employed full-time, just holding a job. This is only half the odds of 20 years ago. And if employed, this dropout earned $6,700 a year, which is half of what a school dropout earned in 1973. We don't even have to go back to the 40s, right after the war. We're talking about a simple decade earlier. We all know that lack of education is also linked to crime and delinquency, that more than half of the adult prison population is functionally illiterate. 40% of adjudicated juvenile delinquents have treatable learning disabilities that were not diagnosed in schools. So, with that backdrop, the sense of current reformers is that American public schools designed for the 19th century, and I would even argue in many respects for the 18th century, are incapable of solving the problems that will face us in the 21st century. The problem is not simply one of poor teachers and poor personnel and decaying infrastructure, although those are real problems. The problems are also a radical change in what we need as a society from educated people. A sense of urgency of reformers comes from the convergence of these trends, which are changing society in profound ways, and a growing conviction that there simply can be no throwaway children in the educational system if they and the nation are to survive and prosper. So beginning with that basic premise that there can be no throwaway children anymore in the educational system, I'd like to just briefly treat several of the education goals and discuss frankly with you what must be done if they are to be met. Goals are fine and wonderful, but how will we realize these goals specifically? What has to be done? The first goal is that all children will start school ready to learn. But readiness for a successful school experience depends on many factors, including, most importantly, the child's health and learning environment prior to entering school. By many indicators today, the environments available to children are less likely to produce readiness for school success than was the case a decade or more ago. 1 out of 4 American children lives in poverty, a substantial increase since 1975. 14% are children of teenage mothers. In recent years, the number of low birth weight and substance-addicted children born with a high probability of health and education-related problems has risen sharply. Some estimates say as high as 10% of recent births, 1 out of 10. Meanwhile, more children are living in single-parent households. Children living in female-headed households live below the poverty line most of the time, and nearly 70% of children have mothers who are in the workforce. and yet the availability of high-quality daycare is limited. It is very important for us to note, in terms of reaching this goal, that the single most important factor in predicting the effectiveness of these early childhood programs is the staff's early childhood development training. It is not just a babysitting enterprise if we're to do the job that needs to be done. Head Start, of course, we all know is an excellent program, but it serves only about 15% of the children who are eligible for its services at this point in time. In 1985, fewer than 1/3 of the 4-year-olds from families with incomes under $10,000 attended preschool, while, on the other hand, more than 2/3 of those from families with incomes of $25,000 or more did so. The best chances for meeting the nation's goal for school readiness will couple prenatal and childhood health and nutritional care with high-quality preschool educational opportunities. The second goal, the high school graduation rate will increase to at least 90%. The current status vis-a-vis that goal is that the high school graduation rate for 18 to 19-year-olds is under 75%, and that has been stagnant for 15 years. Meanwhile, the graduation rates of many other countries have been steadily increasing, and most industrialized countries' graduation rate now exceeds ours by a good deal. The rates for 18 to 19-year-old African American and Hispanic youth are much lower than even that national rate of 75%. Just over 60% for black youth and around 50% for Hispanic youth. The most important factor influencing the experiences of students in school is the quality and stability of the teaching and administrative staff. Research on effective schools demonstrates that successful schools have strong principals who focus on recruiting and supporting stable and highly motivated teaching support staffs. And these teachers are both well prepared and focused on student success, the success of each and every child. In recent years, urban schools have lost substantial ground in their ability to recruit and retain this crucial resource, the teaching force, for their students. Urban schools' inability to pay competitive teacher salaries during times of growing teacher shortages has meant a growing crisis in the provision of teachers. Large cities like New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and Dallas have started school in recent years with hundreds of vacancies unfilled and thousands more filled with unqualified teachers. In New York City alone, 3/4 of the 4,600 teachers hired last year were uncertified. And the vast majority of these, over 80%, had no preparation for teaching. These unprepared teachers are almost always assigned to schools serving the most disadvantaged pupil populations. Students' personal circumstances also play a role. When community environments display little rationale for succeeding in school and pose multiple threats to doing so, schools must exert extra effort to encourage students to persevere. Parenting education and support programs have often been found to help, along with community services, after-school programs, mentoring, and the other kinds of personal relationships that volunteers and community agencies can provide. Goal number 3. Students will demonstrate in the 4th, 8th, and 12th grades that they can handle such subject matter as English, mathematics, science, history, and geography. Every school will make sure its students learn to use their minds well so that they will be ready for responsible citizenship, further learning, and productive employment. Currently, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, indicates that over more than a decade now, tests have found stable or increasing performance on basic skills at low levels of cognitive functioning, but declining performance on tasks requiring critical thinking, problem solving, abilities in reading, writing, science, and mathematics. These declines in students' thinking and performance abilities have been steady and unreversed since the 1970s. Please think of this when back to basics has some kind of ring in your ear. Basics is the floor. None of our young people now needs to aspire just to reach the floor. There are particularly noticeable drop-offs at the high school level. And I will bore you, perhaps, with just a few highlights from the NAEP report. It's staggering. 61% of the 17-year-olds could not read or understand relatively complicated materials such as that typically presented at the high school level. Nearly one-half appear to have limited mathematics skills and abilities that go little beyond adding, subtracting, and multiplying with whole numbers. More than one-half could not evaluate the procedures or results of a scientific study. And few included enough information in their written pieces to communicate their ideas effectively. Additionally, assessments result in other curriculum areas indicate that high school juniors have little sense of historical chronology, have not read much literature, and tend to be unfamiliar with the uses and potential applications of computers. Here we are not talking about poor, impoverished children in poverty living in large inner city schools. We're talking about everybody. At the levels of achievement needed to fill the 30% of jobs in our new economy that are professional and technical jobs, the picture is even more grim. Only 5% of 17-year-olds in the United States today can synthesize and learn from specialized reading materials. Only 6% can use basic algebra and solve mathematical problems with more than one step. Only 7% can draw conclusions using detailed scientific knowledge. 5, 6, and 7% of 17-year-olds. There are many explanations for why U.S. schools are doing so appallingly poorly in preparing students to think critically and perform at high levels. NAEP and many other organizations point out that the curriculum in most schools is geared toward lower order, rote skills. That current emphases on multiple choice basic tests in schools reinforce the tendency to teach the wrong way. And furthermore, that a smaller proportion of American students than those in other countries take a rigorous academic program of coursework in schools. Other analyses point out that chronic and worsening shortages of secondary school teachers in mathematics and science, foreign languages, and now even in English and social studies as well, make it impossible to offer a full academic program to most students. For example, 1/3 of American high schools cannot offer any physics course in a given year. Shortages of teachers in a range of subjects prevent schools from even offering all students a full set of course requirements urged by the National Commission on Excellence in Education. The effects of teacher shortages on our ability to respond to pressing national needs is devastating. We must look to teachers, not just to deliver lectures and assign homework, but to know enough about teaching and learning that they can find and encourage students' strengths diagnose difficulties, and respond with effective and appropriate teaching strategies. This we are in very poor shape to do at this point in time. Goal 4, American students will rank first in mathematics and science. In the most recent International Assessment of Educational Process, American students ranked last in mathematics and 9th out of 12 in science. American students have ranked near the bottom in international assessments of mathematics and science for more than 15 years. In the largest recent multinational mathematics study, U.S. 8th graders ranked 16th out of 20 in geometry, just above Nigeria, Swaziland, and Israel. And 12th graders were next to the bottom in advanced algebra, just above Thailand. Americans study less mathematics than students in other countries, and fewer take advanced courses. The average Japanese student scores higher than the top 5 of American students in college preparatory mathematics, and more of them are in school at 12th grade taking those courses. Only about 3% of American students take calculus in high school, for example, as compared to 4 or 5 times that number in other countries. In large part, there again, the poor showing is due to a chronic and critical shortage of mathematics and science teachers over the last 40 years. For the estimated 20,000 teaching positions that need to be filled annually in these fields, there are fewer than 5,000 new entrants being prepared. Recent studies have found that course-taking opportunities are the strongest predictors of achievement, that they reduce virtually all of the differential usually attributed to students' socioeconomic backgrounds. On all measures, however, curriculum opportunities are allocated unequally. For example, high minority and inner city schools are more than twice as likely to have difficulty filling math and science teacher vacancies with qualified applicants. Consequently, they have fewer teachers in this area, and only about half of the teachers teaching mathematics or science in these schools are even certified to do so. Students have significantly less opportunity in these schools to take any mathematics or science courses. Only about 1/4 the number of academic courses in math and science are even offered in their schools. Consequently, it is sad to say, if and when they finish high school, 80% of African American and Hispanic young people are automatically disqualified for technical careers in college, technical majors in college, because they have not taken the courses. Those for whom the courses are offered very often are poorly counseled and unmotivated to avail themselves of taking those courses. Programs like ours at the National Urban Coalition help to prepare them, their families, and their teachers so that they will realize that they should at least have that option. But there's a massive job of advocacy needed in order to get more of the schools prepared to teach them, because the children right now, they're not even offered in their schools. Goal number 5, and this is the last one that I'll deal with this afternoon. Every adult American will be literate with the knowledge and skills to compete in a global economy and exercise the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Right now, basic levels of literacy for young adults in the United States are pretty high. Virtually all young adults can read at a rudimentary level. However, only 21% read at an advanced level, which requires analyzing or synthesizing information. And proficiency levels differ dramatically for majority and minority young adults. In an economy in which most new jobs are expected to require more than a high school education, and 87% are expected to require at least a high school education. The fact that only 31% of black young adults, 52% of Hispanics, and 68% of whites can read just at the 11th grade level suggests a need for a substantial improvement. How can we get there? Investments in high-quality early childhood education are proven to have demonstrable long-term beneficial effects. Investments in city schools and poor rural schools targeted at critical needs such as the provision of more equitable teaching resources in schools have long-term demonstrable effects. There's a great need for more student financial aid in colleges and universities because entrance rates and graduation rates have taken a steep drop in recent years. Investments in the quality of teaching personnel are more likely to translate into more effective teaching than any other single improvement. The National Center for Education Statistics estimates that at least 2.3 million new teachers will need to be hired between now and the year 2000. This is primarily because nearly half of the current teaching force will be retiring, and the younger teachers replacing them usually have very high turnover rates. Almost half of them leave the profession within 7 years. Currently, only about 135,000 a year are being prepared, compared to the 230,000 that are needed. So a real focus and investment in the quality of our teaching force, I would say, is the very first prerequisite to turning this situation around. Finally, improvements in education and teaching must rely on an expanding knowledge base. This is an area where the federal role, though acknowledged as legitimate, is paltry indeed. Compared to the $5 billion a year spent on health-related research, the total federal education research budget is a drop in the bucket. Federal funding for education research has declined in real dollar terms by about 75% since just 1972, and now amounts to less than $200 million. For a $300 billion enterprise, this sum represents less than 1/100th of 1%. By comparison, the $45 billion spent on national defense research in '86 represented closer to 15% of the overall defense budget. We have to encourage what works, but in order to do that, we have to continue to uncover and understand, as well as support, those things that are proving effective in educating all children for the changing world that awaits them. We know from our own experience and research that these children can be prepared in proper learning environments. That partnerships such as the one you represent and the one that the Oregon Black United Fund represents are the answer. None of us can do it one by one, but together we can change the picture for the children and help them get a different vision of who they are on the world stage and what they can do. But it requires a massive effort, and that effort can only be undertaken once we have agreed upon a crucial set of strategic objectives that we can all share. I hope very much that I've been able to add a bit to your thinking on that matter. Thank you kindly. Okay. Thank you very much. I do want to acknowledge the extraordinary research analysis of Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, whose work I have been using. She was a former Director of Education for the Coalition, is now Professor of Education at Teachers College in Columbia. It was she who organized that data around the education goals, and I would never want to use it without thanking her.
Excuse me. Our first question will be from Lloyd Anderson, member of the Board of Governors.
You've indicated what I think is a need for a massive infusion of funds from various sources. The question would be, with an administration that seems to think that states have the responsibility, at least to a large extent, for financing education, and states, many of them at least in the country, strapped for resources, where's the money coming from?
Wonder why I thought that question might be among the first questions that we You know, living in Washington, that's the question that everybody asks every day. Many of these do actually require more dollars, and the funding from the federal government will have to be forthcoming. Corporations also are beginning to see greater and greater need to get involved in the first instance rather than trying to retrain their entire workforce after the fact when they get there. Billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent by our multinational corporations today just retraining people for basic entry-level skills. They're beginning to see that dollar is better spent at an earlier point in time. We are advocating a number of different strategies that involve the federal government, the state legislators, corporations up and down the line, and voluntary associations and in-kind contributions from hundreds of thousands of volunteers who can come in, retired teachers, people who are retired from the technical workforce. And you know, as we live to be 80, 90, and 100 years old, if we retired at 65, we're looking at 30 or 40 years when we don't have anything to do. So we're trying to get more and more of them back into an active relationship, both in schools and in community-based settings such as family learning centers, forming study groups and helping to provide at least the human capital that's needed on that end. But I do not back away from a federal role. It has got to be expanded. In many cases, these states are already strapped. Their budgets are already in deficits as a result of the last 10 years, and there's no way that states can shoulder this burden alone.
And the second question is Joanne Allen from the Black United Fund and the City Club Education Standing Committee.
Thank you. Scared myself. The statistics that you spoke of were real alarming. And my big concern is there are so many programs that have excelled at teaching low-income students that are already in existence. Ms. Louise Smith is a perfect example that's here for the education conference. We have these programs that we know they work. Why is it that someone's not saying, let's use this program? Mm-hmm. Why do we keep reinventing the wheel?
That's an excellent question. And I will be very frank, if not blunt, in my response to that question. Inclusion is still a major issue. As a matter of fact, the inequalities that I've described in the classrooms are not confined to the classrooms. Let me give you a quote from Dr. John Ogbu, a Nigerian educator who is now at Berkeley, I believe, who has a very useful book called Minority Education and Caste, C-A-S-T-E, where he says that formal education is future-oriented. The values and ideas that shape teachers' behaviors and practices of the schools, like those which shape the behaviors of parents in their child-rearing practices, are derived from features of adult society. Neither teachers nor parents, for example, will prepare those who come under their tutelage for the roles of vassals or lords in a society which does not include vassalage or lordship in its role repertoire. I want to emphasize that it is the status of minorities in the social, political, and occupational realms of American society, as seen by the dominant white caste, which determines the kind of education offered to them. I say that to say that we must be included. People of color who are educators, parents, policy analysts, and others who have indeed, because they live and work with these young people every day, discovered ways of motivating, teaching, reaching, and training them, must be included in the policy arenas where decisions are made as to how they will be educated, and in the divvying up of resources. Right now, that is not the case. Right now, groups of people who have no knowledge or personal familiarity with a child at all in any of these settings sit in back rooms and think up schemes out of their own economic interests as to how they could be better educated. We could have told them in the first place they would not work. Billions of dollars can go right out the door with no results because people are convinced that they know how to do something they don't know how to do. And yet those of us who do know how, very seldom, are even asked for a rundown on our experiences, let alone brought to the table as equals in the policy-making process. That is a problem which will of necessity change in the next several years because we can't continue to spend billions of dollars to no effect, when in fact there are programs working right in some of those same school systems that remain tiny in scale, unable to bear themselves out through valid research and evaluation methodologies because they are so small, when in fact if the investments were made in them, enormous progress could be made.
Please use the microphone.
Does anybody, okay.
Hi, my name is Leslie Hildula. I think I got it that there's a problem. I think I even got it that there's something in it for me to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't quite have nailed down is, what do I as an individual do about it? And sort of a call to action, I guess, piece.
All right. Without asking you any more specifically, what do you do? I will just in general say that there is a role for each person to play, and I appreciate your bringing it to that point. For a long time, we've sort of just been content to point the finger of blame at one another. Business people at teachers, teachers at parents, parents at kids, and back and back and back again, with nobody ever really assuming any real responsibility or accountability for what was going on. I think we now see that, like education always has been in successful cultures, it's an enterprise that engages each and every one of us. One thing that I encourage our corporate partners to do is to help in the strategic planning process, to bring management resources to bear. There are appropriate roles for business to play in education, but there are also inappropriate roles for business to play. Don't cross that line. Don't try to get into pedagogy, but do bring curriculum supplements and helps. Resources are the most obvious need, and human resources, mentoring, role modeling. I don't know if you all are aware, but many urban school teachers have to buy pencils and paper for their kids out of their own pockets because they have so little in the way of supplies. Whereas in many of your shops, unused calculators, computers, any number of other mechanical devices that just may need a little fixing up just sit on shelves. Think about churches and community organizations and schools that are trying to run programs for children. Take those things off the shelf and get them fixed up and take them down there. Help with after-school programs. I would venture to say that many of our problems stem from the fact that we just don't interact positively with one another. I don't know of any of our most hard-nosed business colleagues who don't light up in a classroom with 4- and 5-year-olds who really want to learn something when they get right next to them and actually start learning. It's not the case that you don't know how to relate to kids. You do. All you have to do is get in there. They'll teach you if you don't. And it's a beautiful, dynamic, positive, progressive feeling and momentum that can be achieved. One of the things that I strongly encourage everyone to think more about is the formation of study groups, both inside and outside the classroom. Recent research from MIT and I think it's UC Berkeley tried to isolate what factors make Asian engineering students so much more successful than any of their cohorts. And it's not income, it's not educational background of their parents, it's not where they went to undergraduate school. The only factor that they could isolate was study groups. These kids get together in a very culturally framed, team-spirited study group every day after school. They have a philosophy that we're going to all master whatever it is we're doing tonight before we leave. All of us, we're going to be sure of it. We're going to test each other. We're going to reinforce one another. Then we're going to look ahead a bit. When they go back in class the next day, no one else even knows that they've been in the study group. They don't sit together. They don't wear badges. They don't carry flags. They just sit wherever they sit, but they're ready. They're ready, and they know they're ready, and they just quietly go on and excel and outstrip everybody else in the classroom. We have started in our program study groups even for the little ones, and this is something anyone can do. You can do it in a church, in a Masonic lodge hall, in a library, at a kitchen table. But it's an adult role, a role that adults can play in helping to organize learning environments for younger people, and it's something that everyone can do. For example, here in Oregon, you may have numbers of children of color who are scattered in different schools. You may have only one kid in a physics program here and another one in a physics program there. One church who just notified all the kids that there would be an adult leader in physics conducting study groups for them 3 nights a week. They would find a way to get there if they had to walk, and they would acquire a sense of team spiritedness, being in this thing together, and also get the hard subject matter content that they need to help them excel, instead of feeling so alienated and frustrated out there one by one. It does need to have a cultural context. It has to be framed as a team very explicitly. But once you do that, they just, by leaps and bounds, they move forward.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Edelin. Patrick Donaldson with the Law and Public Safety Standing Committee. My question for you is, what has the presence or absence of African American males in the home meant to the dropout rate for African American children, and what role do you feel they should or will play in preparing those youth for the 21st century?
To the dropout rate was the first thing you said specifically? I don't know if anyone's done anything specific to the dropout rate, but certainly African American men have I'm not so much of a feminist that I don't believe that African American men, like all other men, have a definite role to play in their own families and also in communities. Frankly, I think there's a vital piece of research that has not been done, and I hope I'm not stepping on any toes needlessly by saying this, but the generation of men, my generation of men, the effect and impact of the Vietnam War on these African American men has not been assessed in any systematic way. These are the men who should be our husbands and the fathers and grandfathers of these children at a time in our history when marriageability rates and parenting roles by men have just dropped right off the map. I think, because I am a product of that generation, that there's a correlation between the two, but that has not been studied and that has not been proven. We're very fortunate that even though in many cities you don't still have that extended family network that we enjoyed perhaps in this rural South, still can be reconstructed. There are some grandfathers still around. There are many men in churches, retired teachers and retired professionals and others who will, I hate that word surrogate, but who will be surrogate parents for young people if you get them in a structured setting. That's another real good reason for forming family learning centers in every community-based setting that you can, including in some schools, after school if possible, because you can get men from the community in to take the place of fathers who simply for a number of reasons are not there at this point in time. It's a vital role. There's no question of that. And it's one which we have to sort of stand in for. And now, unfortunately, many of the young women who are becoming chemically dependent in various ways also need surrogates to help stand in for them for the first time in our history.
Dr. Edelin, another issue in educational preparation of our students is gender bias.
Yes.
And studies indicate that girls, as they develop, get less attention and less encouragement in school, and therefore are underrepresented in math and science. And could you help me understand, to what degree is this an issue that is common across all our ethnic groups and cultures, or is it differential in the African American community or the Hispanic or the Anglo community?
It is a problem for all girls. It is less of a problem in language, social studies, and the humanities than it is in math and science. And in a curious way, the way that our classrooms are structured and the way that we teach in the lower grades favors girls. This whole business, which we are total advocates of moving away from, of a top-down authority figure lecturing at a class for 30 and 40 minutes at a time, we think needs to be thrown right out on its ear. We are advocates of hands-on, small group, inquiry-based learning format, cooperative learning formats. But to the extent that lectures are still the primary modality for teaching, they favor girls. Girls can put up with sitting there a little longer than the boys can. Just a fraction, and more of these girls are beginning to feel like the rest of the fellows, but it does to that extent. Now, but the problem is that most elementary school teachers aren't teaching much math and science anyway. By the time you get to high school and you move from class to class, but you still have the lecture modality, the girls even then are penalized. Where girls of African American girls, not Hispanic girls, may have a slight advantage for the first time is in college going rates, and it's a great disaster. But right now, the ratios are as high as 4 and 5 to 1 of girls getting a chance to go on to college than boys. More than likely, they are not in the technical fields, except in a few clusters. My daughter is a senior at Spelman College right now, and I understand that from the president there, Janetta Cole, that 60% of the young women at Spelman are going into the technical fields. But that's very unusual. In most schools, the girls still are not there. The white girls are going into the technical fields at a slightly higher rate than they used to, but it's still very much out of proportion with boys. And given the fact that more and more girls are going to college and are going to be in the workforce, that's got to change because they won't have a meaningful role to play.
Here's a question, a written question. We have what we call the CATS plan for Oregon, which would have students at the ripe age of 16 decide one of two paths, one higher education or two a trade. How would this plan work with your goals, and what do you think of this plan?
Well, I'm kind of sorry that it has an actual name attached to it and it's not a little more generic, since I don't know anything about the CATS plan other than what's involved in that. But I don't think 16 is a good age to make a life or death decision. More importantly, though, is the tracking system that most of our schools employ well before 6th grade, 16. I don't know if many of you are aware of it, but some children are tracked as early as kindergarten, and decisions made for them which are virtually irreversible at that tender age, and is based practically on how you look when you come in the classroom. I'm an opponent of ability grouping of that kind. I think young people should have opportunities to test out what they like, to find where their aptitudes are, and to explore that in as much depth as possible, but not to have irreversible tracks of any kind. I know how many of us, when we were even freshmen in college, really knew what we wanted to do, and that was 30 years ago. How many young people today will make one choice? I mean, even we have had 4 or 5 careers just in the last 20 or 30 years. The whole world is opening up to them. They don't have to make a once and for all choice at that point in time. However, to say that is not to say that they shouldn't be given intensive opportunities to explore what they do like at that early age. I think they should. I just would hope it would not be irreversible.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.